That is the purpose of the lodge, said Sedire. To be a place where we are free to meet and converse and confide, outside the strictures of rank and martial order. There is only one qualification a man needs to be a part of our quiet order. He must be a warrior. In this company, said Targost, a man of any rank can meet and speak openly of his troubles, his doubts, his ideas, his dreams, without fear of scorn or monition from a commanding officer. This is a sanctuary for our spirit as men. Look around, Aximand invited, stepping forwards, gesturing with his hands. Look at these faces, Gaviel. Company captains, sergeants, file warriors. Where else could such a mix of men meet as equals? We leave our ranks at the door when we come in. Here, a senior commander can talk with a junior initiate, man to man. Here, knowledge and experience is passed on, ideas are circulated, commonalities discovered. Sergar holds the office of Lodge Master only so that a function of order may be maintained. Targost nodded. Horus is right. Gaviel, do you know how old the Quiet Order is? Decades? No. Older. Perhaps thousands of years older. There have been lodges in the legions since their inception, and allied orders in the army and all other branches of the martial divisions. The lodge can be traced back into antiquity, before even the Unification Wars. It's not a cult, nor a religious obscenity, just a fraternity of warriors. Some legions do not practice the habit, some do. Ours always has done. It lends us strength. How? Asked Loken. By connecting warriors otherwise divorced by rank or station. It makes bonds between men who would otherwise not even know one another's name. We thrive like all legions from our firm hierarchy of formal authority, the loyalty that flows down from a commander through to his lowest soldier. Loyal to a squad, to a section, to a company. The Lodge reinforces complementary links across that structure, from squad to squad, company to company. It could be said to be our secret weapon. It is the true strength of the Lunar Wolves, strapping us together, side to side, where we are already bound up top to toe. You have a dozen spears to carry into war, said Togadon quietly. You gather them, shaft to shaft, as a bundle, so they are easier to bear. How much easier is that bundle to carry if it is tied together around the shafts? If that was a metaphor, Loken said, it was lousy. Let me speak, said another man. It was Kalis Ekadon. He stepped forwards to face Loken. There's been bad blood between us, Loken, he said bluntly. There has. A little matter of rivalry on the field, I admitted. After the High City fight, I hated your guts. So, in the field, though we served the same master and followed the same standard, there'd always be friction between us. Competition, am I right? I suppose. I've never spoken to you, Ekadon said. Never. Informally. We don't meet or mix, but I tell you this much. I've heard you tonight in this place amongst friends. I've heard you stand up for your beliefs and your point of view, and I've learned respect for you. You speak your mind. You have principles. Tomorrow, Loken, no matter what you decide tonight, I'll see you in a new light. You'll not get any grief from me anymore, because I know you now. I've seen you as the man you are. He laughed, raw and loud. Terror, it's a crude example, Loken, for I'm a crude fellow, but it shows what the Lodge can do. He held out his hand. After a moment, Loken took it. There's a thing at least, said Ekadon. Now, get on, if you're going. We've talking and drinking to do. Or will you stay? Asked Togadon. For now. Perhaps, said Loken. The meeting lasted for 2 hours. Togadon had brought wine, and Sedire produced some meat and bread from the flagship's commissary. There were no crude rituals or demonic practices to observe. The men, the brothers, sat around and talked in small groups, then listened as Aximand recounted the details of a Xenos war that he had participated in, which he hoped might give them insight into the fight ahead. Afterwards, Torgadden told some jokes, most of them bad. As Torgadden rambled on with a particularly involved and vulgar tale, Aximand came over to Loken.
Where do you suppose, he began quietly, the notion of the Mournival came from?
From this? Loken asked. Aximand nodded.
The Mournival has no legitimate standing or powers. It's simply an informal organ, but the War Master would not be without it. It was created originally as a visible extension of the Invisible Lodge, though that link has long since gone. They're both informal bodies interlaced into the very formal structures of our lives. For the benefit of all, I believe.
I imagine so many horrors about the Lodge, said Loken.
I know. All part of that straight up and down thing you do so well, Garvey. It's why we love you, and the Lodge would like to embrace you. Will there be formal vows? All the theatrical rigmarole of the Mournival?
Aximand laughed.
No. If you're in, you're in. There are only very simple rules. You don't talk about what passes between us here to any not of the Lodge. This is downtime, free time. The men, especially the junior ranks, need to be confident they can speak freely without any comeback. You should hear what some of them say. I think I might like to. That's good. You'll be given a medal to carry, just as a token. And if anyone asks you about any Lodge confidence, the answer is, I can't say. There's nothing else, really.
I've misjudged this thing, Loken said.
I made it quite a demon in my head, imagining the worst. I understand. Particularly given the matter of poor Jubal.
And given your own staunch character.
Am I to replace Jubal? It's not a matter of replacement, little Horus said. And anyway, no. Jubal was a member, though he hadn't attended any meetings in years. That's why we forgot to palm away his medal before your inspection. There's your danger sign, Garvey. Not that Jubal was a member, but that he was a member and had seldom attended. We didn't know what was going on in his head. If he'd come to us and shared, we might have preempted the horror you endured at the Whisperheads. But you told me I was to replace someone, Loken said. Yes. Udon. We miss him. Udon was a Lodge member.
Aximand nodded.
A long time, brother. And by the way, go easy on Vipers.
Loken went over to where Nero Vipers was sitting, beside the canister fire. The lively yellow flames jumped into the dark air and sent stray sparks oscillating away into the black. Vipers looked uncomfortable, toying with the heel seam of his new hand.
Nero.
Garviel, I was bracing myself for this.
Why?
Because you didn't want anyone in your command to...
As I understand it, Loken said. And forgive me if I'm wrong, because I'm new to this. But as I understand it, the Lodge is a place for free speech and openness, not discomfort.
Nero smiled and nodded. I was a member of the Lodge long before I came into your command. I respected your wishes, but I couldn't leave the Brotherhood. I kept it hidden. Sometimes I thought about asking you to join, but I knew you'd hate me for it.
You're the best friend I have, Loken said. I couldn't hate you for anything.
The medal, though. Jubal's medal. When you found it, you wouldn't let the matter go.
And all you said was, I can't say. Spoken like a true Lodge member.
Nero sniggered.
By the way, Loken said, it was you, wasn't it?
What?
Who took Jubal's medal?
I told Captain Aximand about your interest, just so he knew. But no, Garvey. I didn't take the medal.
When the meeting closed, Loken walked away along one of the vast service tunnels that ran the length of the ship's bilges. Water dripped from the rusted roof, and oil rainbows shone on the dirty lakes across the deck.
Torgadden ran to catch up with him.
Well? He asked. I was surprised to see you there, said Loken.
I was surprised to see you there, Torgadden replied. A starch ass like you? Loken laughed. Torgadden ran ahead and leapt up to slap his palm against a pipe high overhead. He landed with a splash. Loken chuckled, shook his head, and did the same, slapping higher than Torgadden had managed. The pipe clang echoed away from them down the tunnel. Under the engineerium, Torgadden said, the ducts are twice as high, but I can touch them. You lie. I'll prove it. We'll see. They walked on for a while. Torgadden whistled the Legion March loudly and tunelessly. Nothing to say? He asked at length. About what? Well, about that. I was misinformed. I understand better now. And? Loken stopped and looked at Torgadden. I have only one worry, he said. The Lodge meets in secret, so, logically, it is good at keeping itself secret. I have a problem with secrets. Which is? If you get good at keeping them, who knows what kind you'll end up keeping. Torgadden maintained a straight face for as long as possible, and then exploded in laughter. No good, he spluttered. I can't help it. You're so straight up and down. Loken smiled, but his voice was serious. So you keep telling me. But I mean it, Tarek. The Lodge hides itself so well. It's become used to hiding things. Imagine what it could hide if it wanted to. The fact that you're a starch ass? Torgadden asked. I think that's common knowledge. It is. It so is. Torgadden chuckled. He paused. So, will you attend again? I can't say, Loken replied. 6. 4 full companies of the Lunar Wolves had dropped into the clearing, and the Megarachnid forces had perished beneath their rapacious onslaught, those that had not fled back into the shivering forests. A block of smoke, as black and vast as a mountainside, hung over the battlefield in the cold night air. Xenos bodies covered the ground, curled and shriveled like metal shavings. Captain Torgadden, the Lunar Wolf said, introducing himself formally and making the sign of the Aquila. Captain Tarvitz, Tarvitz responded. My thanks and respect for your intervention. The honor's mine, Tarvitz, Torgadden said. He glanced around the smouldering field. Did you really assault here with only 6 men? It was the only workable option in the circumstances, Tarvitz replied. Nearby, Bull was freeing Lucius from the wad of megarachnid cement. Are you alive? Torgadden asked, looking over. Lucius nodded sullenly and set himself apart while he picked the scabs of cement off his perfect armor. Torgadden regarded him for a moment, then turned his attention to the Vox intel. How many with you? Tarvitz asked. A spear tip, said Torgadden. 4 companies. A moment, please. 2nd company, form up on me. Luke, secure the perimeter. Bring up the heavies. Sergar, cover the left flank. Verulam, I'm waiting. Front up the right wing. The Vox crackled back. Who's the commander here? A voice demanded. I am, said Torgadden, swinging round. Flanked by a dozen of the Emperor's children, the tall, proud figure of Lord Eidolon crunched towards them across the fuming white slag. I am Eidolon, he said, facing Torgadden. Torgadden. Under the circumstances, Eidolon said, I'll understand if you don't bow. I can't for the life of me imagine any circumstances in which I would, Torgadden replied. Eidolon's bodyguards wrenched out their combat blades. What did you say? Demanded one. I said you boys should put those pig sticks away before I hurt somebody with them. Eidolon raised his hand, and the men sheathed their swords. I appreciate your intervention, Torgadden, for the situation was grave. Also, I understand that the Lunar Wolves are not bred like proper men, with proper manners, so I'll overlook your comment. That's Captain Torgadden, Torgadden replied. If I insulted you in any way, let me assure you, I meant it. Face to face with me, Eidolon growled, and tore off his helm, forcing his gen-enhanced biology to cope with the atmosphere and the radioactive wind. Torgadden did the same. They stared into each other's eyes. Tarvitz watched the confrontation in mounting disbelief. He'd never seen anyone stand up to Lord Eidolon. The pair were chest plate to chest plate, Eidolon slightly taller. Torgadden seemed to be smirking. "How would you like this to go, Eidolon?" Torgadden inquired. "Would you perhaps like to go home with your head stuck up your arse?" "You are a base-born cur," Eidolon hissed. "Just so you know," replied Torgadden, "you'll have to do an awful lot better than that. I'm a base-born cur and proud of it. You know what that is?" He pointed up at one of the stars above them. "A star?" asked Eidolon, momentarily wrong-footed. "Yes, probably. I haven't the faintest idea. The point is, I'm the designated commander of the Lunar Wolf Spear Tip, come to rescue your sorry backsides. I do this by warrant of the War Master himself. He's up there, in one of those stars, and right now he thinks you're a cretin. And he'll tell Fulgrim so next time he meets him." "Do not speak my Primarch's name so irreverently, you bastard. Horus will—" "There you go again," Torgadden sighed, pushing Eidolon away from him with a two-handed shove to the Lord's breastplate. "He's the War Master." Another shove. "The War Master. Your War Master. Show some cursed respect." Eidolon hesitated. "I, of course, recognize the majesty of the War Master." "Do you? Do you, Eidolon? Well, that's good, because I'm it. I'm his chosen instrument here. You'll address me as if I were the War Master. You'll show me some respect, too. War Master Horus believes you've made some shit-awful mistakes in your prosecution of this theater. How many brothers did you drop here? A company? How many left? Sergar? Head count?" 39 live ones, Tarik, the Vox answered. "There may be more. Lots of body piles to dig through." 39. You were so hungry for glory, you wasted more than half a company. If I was Primarch Fulgrim, I'd have your head on a pole. The War Master may yet decide to do just that. So, Lord Eidolon, are we clear?" "We," Eidolon replied slowly, "are clear, Captain." "Perhaps you'd like to go and undertake a review of your forces," Torgadden suggested. "The enemy will be back soon, I'm sure, and in greater numbers." Eidolon gazed venomously at Torgadden for a few seconds, and then replaced his helm. "I will not forget this insult, Captain," he said. "Then it was worth the trip," Torgadden replied, clamping on his own helmet. Eidolon crunched away, calling to his scattered troops. Torgadden turned and found Tarvitz looking at him. "What's on your mind, Tarvitz?" he asked. "Chaos." "I've been wanting to say that for a long time," Tarvitz wished to say. Out loud he said, "What do you need me to do?" "Gather up your squad and stand ready. When the shit comes down next, I'd like to know you're with me." Tarvitz made the sign of the Aquila across his chest. "You can count on it." "How did you know where to drop?" Torgadden pointed at the calm sky. "We came in where the storm had gone out," he said. Tarvitz hoisted Lucius to his feet. Lucius was still picking at his ruined armor. "That Torgadden is an odious rogue," he said. Lucius had overheard the entire confrontation. "I rather like him." "The way he spoke to our lord? He's a dog." "I like dogs," Tarvitz said. "I believe I will kill him for his insolence." "Don't," Tarvitz said. "That would be wrong, and I'd have to hurt you if you did." Lucius laughed, as if Tarvitz had said something funny. "I mean it," Tarvitz said. Lucius laughed even more.
Now is the time of conquest.
It took a little under an hour to assemble their forces in the clearing. Torgadden established contact with the fleet via the astro-telepath he had brought with him. The shield storms raged with dreadful fury over the surrounding stalk forests, but the sky directly above the clearing remained calm. As he marshaled the remains of his force, Tarvitz observed Torgadden and his fellow captains conducting a further angry debate with Eidolon and Antaeus. There were apparently some differences of opinion as to what their course of action should be. After a while, Torgadden walked away from the argument. Tarvitz guessed he was recusing himself from the quarrel before he said something else to infuriate Eidolon. Torgadden walked the line of the picket, stopping to talk to some of his men, and finally arrived at Tarvitz's position. "You seem like a decent sword, Tarvitz," he remarked. "How do you stand that lord of yours?" "It is my duty to stand him," Tarvitz replied. "It is my duty to serve. He is my Lord Commander. His combat record is glorious. I doubt he'll be adding this endeavor to his triumph roll," Torgadden said. "Tell me, did you agree with his decision to drop here?" "I neither agreed nor disagreed," Tarvitz replied. "I obeyed. He is my Lord Commander." "I know that," Torgadden sighed. "All right. Just between you and me, Tarvitz. Brother to brother. Did you like the decision?" "I really..." "Oh, come on. I just saved your life. Answer me candidly, and we'll call it quits." Tarvitz hesitated. "I thought it a little reckless," he admitted. "I thought it was prompted by ambitious notions that had little to do with the safety of our company or the salvation of the missing forces." "Thank you for speaking honestly." "May I speak honestly a little more?" Tarvitz asked. "Of course." "I admire you, sir," Tarvitz said, "for both your courage and your plain speaking. But, please, remember that we are the Emperor's children, and we are very proud. We do not like to be shown up or belittled, nor do we like others, even other Astartes of the most noble legions, diminishing us. When you say we, you mean Eidolon?" "No, I mean we." "Very diplomatic," said Torgadden. "In the early days of the Crusade, the Emperor's children fought alongside us for a time, before you had grown enough in numbers to operate autonomously." "I know, sir. I was there. But I was just a file trooper back then." "Then you'll know the esteem with which the Lunar Wolves regarded your legion. I was a junior officer back then, too. But I remember distinctly that Horus said... what was it? That the Emperor's children were the living embodiment of the Adeptus Astartes. Horus enjoys a special bond with your Primarch. The Lunar Wolves have cooperated militarily with just about every other legion during this great war. We still regard yours as about the best we've ever had the honor of serving with." "It pleases me to hear you say so, sir," Tarvitz replied. "Then, how have you changed so?" Torgadden asked. "Is Eidolon typical of the command echelon that rules you now? His arrogance astounds me. So damn superior." "Our ethos is not about superiority, Captain," Tarvitz answered. "It is about purity. But one is often mistaken for the other. We model ourselves on the Emperor, beloved by all, and in seeking to be like him, we can seem aloof and haughty." "Did you ever think," asked Torgadden, "that while it's laudable to emulate the Emperor as much as possible, the one thing that you cannot and should not aspire to is his supremacy? He is the Emperor. He is singular. Strive to be like him in all ways, by all means, but do not presume to be on his level. No one belongs there. No one is alike to him." "My legion understands that," Tarvitz said. "Sometimes, though, it doesn't translate well to others." "There's no purity in pride," Torgadden said. "Nothing pure or admirable in arrogance or overconfidence. My Lord Eidolon knows this. He should show he knows it. He led you into a disaster, and he won't even apologize for it. I'm sure, in due course, my lord will formally acknowledge your efforts in relieving us, and..." "I don't want any credit," Torgadden said. "You were brothers in trouble, and we came to help. That's the start and finish of it. But I had to face down the War Master to get permission to drop, because he believed it was insanity to send any more men to their deaths in an unknowable place against an unknowable foe. That's what Eidolon did. In the name, I imagine, of honor and pride." "How did you convince the War Master?" Tarvitz wondered. "I didn't," said Torgadden. "You did. The storm had gone out over this area, and we detected your Vox scatter. You proved you were still alive down here, and the War Master immediately sanctioned the spear tip to come and pull you out." Torgadden looked up at the misty stars. "The storms are their best weapon," he mused. If we're going to wrestle this world to compliance, we'll have to find a way to beat them. Eidolon suggested the trees might be key, that they might act as generators or amplifiers for the storm. He said that once he'd destroyed the trees, the storm in this locality collapsed. Tarvitz paused. My lord Eidolon said that. Only piece of sense I've heard out of him. He said that as soon as he set charges to the trees and demolished them, the storm went out. It's an interesting theory. The War Master wants me to use the storm break to pull everyone here out. But Eidolon is dead set on finding more trees and leveling them, in the hope that we can break a hole in the enemy's cover. What do you think? I think my lord Eidolon is wise, said Tarvitz. Bull had been stationed nearby and had overheard the exchange. He could not contain himself any longer. Permission to speak, Captain, he said. Not now, Bull, Tarvitz said. Sir, I... You heard him, Bull, Lucius cut in, walking up to them. What's your name, brother? Torgadden asked. Bull, sir. What did you want to say? It's not important, Lucius snorted. Brother Bull speaks out of turn. You are Lucius, right? Torgadden asked. Captain Lucius. And Bull was one of the men who stood over you and fought to keep you alive? He did. I am honored by his service. Maybe you could let him talk, then, Torgadden suggested. It would be inappropriate, said Lucius. Tell you what, Torgadden said. As commander of the spear tip, I believe I have authority here. I'll decide who talks and who doesn't. Bull, let's hear you, brother. Bull looked awkwardly at Lucius and Tarvitz. That was an order, said Torgadden. My lord Eidolon did not destroy the trees, sir. Captain Tarvitz did it. He insisted. My lord Eidolon then chastised him for the act, claiming it was a waste of charges. Is this true? Torgadden asked. Yes, said Tarvitz. Why did you do it? Because it didn't seem right for the bodies of our dead to hang in such ignominy, Tarvitz said. And you'd let Eidolon take the credit and not say anything? He is my lord. Thank you, brother, Torgadden said to Bull. He glanced at Lucius. Reprimand him or punish him in any way for speaking out, and I'll have the War Master himself personally deprive you of your rank. Torgadden turned to Tarvitz. It's a funny thing. It shouldn't matter, but it does. Now I know you felled the trees, I feel better about pursuing that line of action. Eidolon clearly knows a good idea when someone else has it. Let's go cut down a few more trees, Tarvitz. You can show me how it's done. Torgadden walked away, shouting out orders for muster and movement. Tarvitz and Lucius exchanged long looks, and then Lucius turned and walked away. The armed force moved away from the clearing and back into the thickets of the stalk forest. They passed back into the embrace of the storm cover. Torgadden had his Terminator squads lead the way. The man-tanks, under the command of Trice Rocus, ignited their heavy blades and cut a path, felling the stalks to clear a wide avenue into the forest swathe. They pressed on beneath the wild storms for 20 kilometers. Twice, Megarachnid skirmish parties assaulted their lines, but the spear tip drew its phalanxes close and, with the advantage of range created by the cleared avenue, slaughtered the attackers with their bolters. The landscape began to change. They were apparently reaching the edge of a vast plateau, and the ground began to slope away steeply before them. The stalk growth became more patchy and sparse, clinging to the rocky, ferrous soil of the descent. A wide basin spread out below them, a rift valley. Here, the spongy, marshy ground was covered with thousands of small coned trees, rising some 10 meters high, which dotted the terrain like fungal growths. The trees, hard and stony and composed of the same milky cement for which the murder trees had been built, peppered the depression like armor studs. As they descended onto it, the Astartes found the land at the base of the rift swampy and slick, decorated with long, thin lakes of water, stained orange by the iron content of the soil. The flash of the overhead storms scintillated in reflection from the long, slender pools. They looked like claw wounds in the earth. The air was busy with fibrous grey bugs that milled and swirled interminably in the stagnant atmosphere. Larger flying things, flitting like bats, hunted the bugs in quick, sharp swoops. At the mouth of the rift, they discovered 6 more thorn trees arranged in a silent grove. Reduced cadavers and residual meat and armor adorned their barbs. Blood angels and Imperial army. There was no sign of the winged clades, though 50 kilometers away, over the stalk forests, black shapes could be seen, circling madly in the lightning-washed sky. "Lay them low," Torgadden ordered. Moy nodded and began to gather munitions. "Find Captain Tarbitz," Torgadden called. "He'll show you how to do it." Loken remained on the Strategium for the first 3 hours after the drop, long enough to celebrate Torgadden's signal from the surface. The spear tip had secured the drop site and formed up with a residue of Lord Eidolon's company. After that, the atmosphere had become, strangely, more tense. They were waiting to hear Torgadden's field decision. Abaddon, cautious and closed, had already ordered Stormbirds prepped for extraction flights. Aximand paced, silently. The War Master had withdrawn into his sanctum with Malagurst. Loken leant at the Strategium rail for a while, overlooking the bustle of the vast bridge below, and discussed tactics with Tybalt Mar. Mar and Moy were both sons of Horus, cast in his image so firmly that they looked like identical twins. At some point in the Legion's history, they had earned the nicknames the Either and the Or, referring to the fact that they were almost interchangeable. It was often hard to distinguish between them, they were so alike. One might do as well as the other. Both were competent field officers, with a rack of victories each that would make any captain proud, though neither had attained the glories of Cedere or Abaddon. They were precise, efficient, and workmanlike in their leadership, but they were lunar wolves, and what was workmanlike to that phratery was exemplary to any other regiment. As Mar spoke, it became clear to Loken that he was envious of his twin's selection to the undertaking. It was Horus's habit to send both, or neither. They worked well together, complementing one another, as if somehow anticipating one another's decisions. But the ballot for the spear tip had been democratic and fair. Moy had won a place. Mar had not. Mar rattled on to Loken, evidently sublimating his worries about his brother's fate. After a while, Cruz came over to join them at the rail. Yacton Cruz was an anachronism. Ancient and rather tiresome, he had been a captain in the Legion since its inception, his prominence entirely eclipsed once Horus had been repatriated and given command by the Emperor. He was the product of another era, a throwback to the years of the Unification Wars and the bad old times. Stubborn and slightly cantankerous, a vestigial trace of the way the Legion had gone about things in antiquity. "Brothers," he greeted them as he came up. Cruz still had a habit, perhaps unconscious, of making the salute of the single clenched fist against his breast, the old pre-unity symbol, rather than the double-handed eagle. He had a long, tanned face, deeply lined with creases and folds, and his hair was white. He spoke softly, expecting others to make the effort to listen, and believed that it was his quiet tone that had, over the years, earned him the nickname the half-heard. Loken knew this wasn't so. Cruz's wits were not as sharp as they'd once been, and he often appeared tired or inappropriate in his commentary or advice. He was known as the half-heard because his pronouncements were best not listened to too closely. Cruz believed he stood as a wise father figure to the Legion, and no one had the spite to inform him otherwise. There had been several quiet attempts to deprive him of company command, just as Cruz had made several attempts to become elected to the first captaincy. By duration of service, he should have been so long since. Loken believed that the War Master regarded Cruz with some pity and couldn't abide the idea of retiring him. Cruz was an irksome relic, regarded by the rest of them with equal measures of affection and frustration, who could not accept that the Legion had matured and advanced without him. "We will be out of this in a day," he announced categorically to Loken and Mar. "You mark my words, young man. A day, and the commander will order extraction." "Tariq is doing well," Loken began. "The boy Torgadden has been lucky, but he cannot press this to a conclusion. You mark my words, in and out. in a day.
Hellish power, chaos,
I wish I was down there, Ma said. Foolish thoughts, Cruz decided. It's only a rescue run. I cannot for the life of me imagine what the Emperor's children thought they were doing, going into this hell. I served with them in the early days, you know. Fine fellows, very proper. They taught the wolves a thing or two about decorum, thank you very much. Model soldiers. Put us to shame on the Eastern Fringe, so they did. But that was back then.
It certainly was, said Logan.
It most certainly was, agreed Cruz, missing the irony entirely. I can't imagine what they thought they were doing here.
Prosecuting a war,
Logan suggested. Cruz looked at him diffidently. Are you mocking me, Garville?
Never, sir. I would never do that.
I hope we're deployed, Ma grumbled. And soon. We won't be, Cruz declared. He rubbed the patchy grey goatee that decorated his long, lined face. He was most certainly not a son of Horus.
I've business to attend to,
Logan said, excusing himself.
I'll take my leave, brothers.
Ma glared at Logan, annoyed to be left alone with the half-herd. Logan winked and wandered off, hearing Cruz embark on one of his long and tortuous stories to Ma. Logan went downship to the barrack decks of 10th Company. His men were waiting, half-armored, weapons and kit spread out for fitting. Apprentice and servitors manned portable lathes and forge carts, making final, precise adjustments to plate segments. This was just displacement activity. The men had been battle-ready for weeks. Logan took the time to appraise Vipers and the other squad leaders of the situation, and then spoke briefly to some of the new blood warriors they'd raised to company service during the voyage. These men were especially tense. One 40-20 might see their baptism as full Astartes. In the solitude of his arming chamber, Logan sat for a while, running through certain mental exercises designed to promote clarity and concentration. When he grew bored of them, he took up the book Sinderman had loaned him. He'd read a good deal less of the Chronicles of Ursh during the voyage than he'd intended. The commander had kept him busy. He folded the heavy, yellowed pages open with ungloved hands and found his place. The Chronicles were as raw and brutal as Sinderman had promised. Long-forgotten cities were routinely sacked or burned, or simply evaporated in nuclear storms. Seas were regularly stained with blood, skies with ash, and landscapes were often carpeted with the bleached and numberless bones of the conquered. When armies marched, they marched 1 billion strong, the ragged banners of 1,000,000 standards swaying above their heads in the atomic winds. The battles were stupendous maelstroms of blades and spiked black helms and baying horns, lit by the fires of cannons and burners. Page after page celebrated the cruel practices and equally cruel character of the despot Callaghan. It amused Logan, for the most part. Fanciful logic abounded, as did an air of strained realism. Feats of arms were described that no pre-Unity warriors could have accomplished. These, after all, were the feral hosts of techno-barbarians that the proto-Astartes, in their crude thunder armor, had been created to bring to heel. Callaghan's great generals, Latois and Shankal, and later Qualadon, were described in language more appropriate to Primarchs. They carved, for Callaghan, an impossibly vast domain during the latter part of the Age of Strife. Logan had skipped ahead once or twice, and saw that later parts of the work recounted the fall of Callaghan, and described the apocalyptic conquest of Ursh by the forces of Unity. He saw passages referring to enemy warriors bearing the thunderbolt and lightning emblem, which had been the personal device of the Emperor before the eagle of the Imperium was formalized. These men saluted with the fist of Unity, as Cruz still did, and were clearly arrayed in thunder armor. Logan wondered if the Emperor himself would be mentioned, and in what terms, and wanted to look to see if he could recognize the names of any of the Proto-Astartes warriors. But he felt he owed it to Kirill Sinderman to read the thing thoroughly, and return to his original place and order. He quickly became absorbed by a sequence detailing Shankal's campaigns against the Nordafric conclaves. Shankal had assembled a significant horde of irregular levies from the southern client states of Ursh, and used them to support his main armed strengths, including the infamous Tupolev Lancers and the Red Engines, during the invasion. The Nordafric technogogues had preserved a great deal more high technology for the good of their conclaves than Ursh possessed, and sheer envy, more than anything, motivated the war. Callaghan was hungry for the fine instruments and mechanisms the conclaves owned. 8 epic battles marked Shankal's advance into the Nordafric zones, the greatest of them being Zoza. Over a period of 9 days and nights, the war machines of the Red Engines blasted their way across the cultivated agroponic pastures and reduced them back to the desert from which they had originally been irrigated and nurtured. They cut through the laser-thorn hedges and the jeweled walls of the outer conclave and unleashed dirty atomics into the heart of the ruling zone, before the Lancers led a tidal wave of screaming berserkers through the breach into the earthly paradise of the gardens at Zoza, the last fragment of Eden on a corrupted planet, which they, of course, trampled underfoot. Loken felt himself skipping ahead again as the account bogged down in interminable lists of battle glories and honor rolls. Then his eyes alighted on a strange phrase, and he read back. At the heart of the ruling zone, a 9th minor battle had marked the conquest, almost as an afterthought. One bastion had remained, the Marengon, or walled sanctuary, where the last hierophants of the conclaves held out, practicing, so the text said, their skyomancy by the flame light of their burning realm. Shankal, wishing swift resolution to the conquest, had sent Anult Kiza to crush the sanctuary. Kiza was Lord Marshal of the Tupolev Lancers, and, by various bonds of honor, could call freely upon the services of the Roma, a squadron of mercenary flyers whose richly decorated interceptors, legend said, never landed or touched the earth, but lived eternally in the scope of the air. During the advance on the Marengon, Kiza's anerocritics, and by that word Loken understood the text meant interpreters of dreams, had warned of the Hierophant's skyomancy and their phantasmagorian ways. When the battle began, just as the anerocritics had warned, magics were unleashed. Plagues of insects, as thick as monsoon rain, and so vast in their swirling masses that they blacked out the sun, fell upon Kiza's forces, choking air intakes, weapon ports, visors, ears, mouths, and throats. Water boiled without fire. Engines overheated or burned out. Men turned to stone, or their bones turned to paste, or their flesh succumbed to boils and buboes and flaked off their limbs. Others went mad. Some became demons and turned upon their own. Loken stopped reading and went back over the sentences again. And where the plaguing insects did not crawl, or madness lie, so men did blister and recompose them own selves into the terrible likeness of demons. Such foul pests as the Afrit and the Djeni that persist in the silent desert places. In such visage they turned upon their kin and gnawed them upon their bloody bones. Some became demons and turned upon their own. Anult Kiza himself was slain by one such demon, which had just hours previously been his loyal lieutenant, Wilhelm Mardol. When Shankal heard the news, he flew into a fury, and went at once to the scene, bringing with him what the text described as his wrath singers, who appeared to be magi of some sort. Their leader, or master, was a man called Mafio Ordi, and somehow Ordi drew the wrath singers into a kind of remote warfare with the Hierophants. The text was annoyingly vague about exactly what occurred next, almost as if it was beyond the understanding of the writer. Words such as sorcery and magic were employed frequently, without qualification, and there were invocations to dark primordial gods that the writer clearly thought his audience would have some prior knowledge of. Since the start of the text, Loken had seen references to Callaghan's sorcerous powers and the invisible arts that formed a key part of Ursh's power, but he had taken them to be hyperbole. This was the first time sorcery had appeared on the page, as a kind of fact. The earth trembled, as if afraid. The sky tore like silk. Many in the Urshite force heard the voices of the dead whispering to them. Men caught fire and walked around, bathed in lambent flames that did not consume them, pleading for help. The remote war between the wrath singers and the Hierophants lasted for 6 days, and when it ended, the ancient desert was thick with snow, and the skies had turned blood red. The air formations of the Roma had been forced to flee, lest their craft be torn from the heavens by screaming angels and dashed down upon the ground. At the end of it, all the Wrathsingers were dead, except Ord himself. The Marengon was a smoking hole in the ground, its stone walls so hideously melted by heat they had become slips of glass. And the Hierophants were extinct. The chapter ended. Loken looked up. He had been so enthralled, he wondered if he had missed an alert or a summons. The arming chamber was quiet. No signal runes blinked on the wall panel. He began to read the next part, but the narrative had switched to a sequence concerning some northern war against the nomadic caterpillar cities of the Tagar. He skipped a few pages, hunting for further mention of Ord or sorcery, but could detect none. Frustrated, he set the book aside. Cinderman. Had he given Loken this work deliberately? To what end? A joke? Some veiled message? Loken resolved to study it, section by section, and take his questions to his mentor. But he'd had enough of it for the time being. His mind was clouded, and he wanted it clear for combat. He walked to the Vox plate beside the chamber door and activated it. "Officer of the Watch, how can I serve, Captain?" "Any word from the spear tip?" "I'll check, sir." "No, nothing routed to you." "Thank you. Keep me appraised." "Sir." Loken clicked the Vox off. He walked back to where he had left the book, picked it up, and marked his page. He was using a thin sliver of parchment torn from the edge of one of his oath papers as a marker. He closed the book and went to put it away in the battered metal crate where he kept his belongings. There were precious few items in there, little to show for such a long life. It reminded him of Jubal's meagre effects. If I die, Loken thought, who will clean this out? What will they preserve? Most of the bric-a-brac was worthless trophies, stuff that only meant something to him. The handle of a combat knife he'd broken off in the gullet of a greenskin war boss. Long feathers, now musty and threadbare, from the hatchet beak that had almost killed him on Balthazar, decades earlier. A piece of dirty, rusted wire, knotted at each end, which he'd used to garrote a nameless Eldar champion when all other weapons had been lost to him. That had been a fight, a real test. He decided he ought to tell Ollerton about it sometime. How long ago was it? Ages past, though the memory was as fresh and heavy as if it had been yesterday. Two warriors, deprived of their common arsenals by the circumstance of war, stalking one another through the fluttering leaves of a wind-lashed forest. Such skill and tenacity. Loken had almost wept in admiration for the opponent he had slain. All that was left was the wire and the memory. And when Loken passed, only the wire would remain. Whoever came here after his death would likely throw it out, assuming it to be a twist of rusty wire and nothing more. His rummaging hands turned up something that would not be cast away. The data slate Carcassy had given him. The data slate from Keeler. Loken sat back and switched it on, flicking through the Picts again. Rare Picts. 10th Company, assembled on the embarkation deck for war. The company banner, Loken himself, framed against the bold colour of the flag. Loken taking his oath of moment. The Mourneville group. Abaddon, Aximand, Torgadon, and himself, with Targost and Sedire. He loved the Picts. They were the most precious material gift he'd ever received, and the most unexpected. Loken hoped that, through Ollerton, he might leave some sort of useful legacy. He doubted it would be anything like as significant as these images. He scrolled the Picts back into their file, and was about to deactivate the slate when he saw, for the first time, there was another file lodged in the memory. It was stored, perhaps deliberately, in an annex to the slate's main data folder, hidden from cursory view. Only a tiny icon digit 2 betrayed that the slate was loaded with more than one file of material. It took him a moment to find the annex and open it. It looked like a folder of deleted or discarded images, but there was a tag caption attached to it that read, "In Confidence." Loken cued it. The first pic washed into colour on the slate's small screen. He stared at it, puzzled. It was dark, unbalanced in colour or contrast, almost unreadable. He thumbed up the next, and stared in horrid fascination. He was looking at Jubal, or rather, the thing that Jubal had become in the final moments. A rabid, insane mass, ploughing down a dark hallway towards the viewer. There were more shots. The light, the sheen of them, seemed unnatural, as if the picture unit that had captured them had found difficulty reading the image. There were clear, sharp-focused droplets of gore and sweat frozen in the air as they splashed out in the foreground. The thing behind them, the thing that had shaken the droplets out, was fuzzy and imprecise, but never less than abominable. Loken switched the slate off and began to strip off his armour as quickly as he could. When he was down to the thick, mimetic polymers of his subsuit body glove, he stopped and pulled on a long hooded robe of brown hemp. He took up the slate and a vox cuff and went outside.
Nero!
Vipers appeared, fully plated except for his helm. He frowned in confusion at the sight of Loken's attire. "Garvey, where's your armour? What's going on?"
"I've an errand to run,"
Loken replied quickly, clasping on the vox cuff.
"You have command here in my absence."
"I do?"
"I'll return shortly."
Loken held up the cuff and allowed it to auto-sync channels with Vipers' vox system. Small notice lights on the cuff and the collar of Vipers' armour flashed rapidly and then glowed in unison.
"If the situation changes, if we're called forwards, vox me immediately. I'll not be derelict of my duties, but there's something I must do."
"Like what?"
"I can't say," Loken said.
Nero Vipers paused and nodded. "Just as you say, brother. I'll cover for you and alert you of any changes." He stood watching as his captain, hooded and hurrying, slipped away down an access tunnel and was swallowed by the shadows. The game was going so badly against him that Ignace Carcassy decided it was high time he got his fellow players drunk. 6 of them, with a fairly disinterested crowd of onlookers, occupied a table booth at the forward end of the retreat, under the gilded arches. Beyond them, remembrances and off-duty soldiers, along with ship personnel relaxing between shifts, and a few iterators — one could never tell if an iterator was on duty or off — mingled in the long, crowded chamber, drinking, eating, gaming, and talking. There was a busy chatter, laughter, the clink of glasses. Someone was playing a viol. The retreat had become quite the social focus of the flagship.